only I had known before the breathing began what I know now, and if only I knew now what I knew then, perhaps when the breathing is over.
In other news today, the Nobel Prize for Literature was awarded today to Samuel Beckett, best known for the play Waiting for Godot.
Charming spot. Inspiring prospect. Let's go.
We can't.
Why not?
We're waiting for Godot.
Oh!
I think it's probably the greatest play of the 20th century.
I haven't seen 1,000 plays, and I haven't much less read 1,000 plays. But to me, at my sort of level of intelligence, it seemed extremely sophisticated and painful and affecting.
The expression that there is nothing to express, nothing with which to express, nothing from which to express, no power to express, no desire to express, together with the obligation to express.
Perhaps they've carried me to the threshold of my story, before the door that opens on my story. That will surprise me. If it opens, it'll be I, or the silence. Where I am, I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence, you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
I think when you read Beckett or when you watch Beckett, you learn to listen, to speak, to see better. That's what he's done to us. He's teaching us how to see things we've never seen before.
Tiny little thing, before its time, God-forsaken hole, no love, spare that, speechless all her days, practically speechless, how she survived, that time in court, what did she just say for her, guilty or not guilty?
Beckett is, in my opinion, one of the greatest writers of this century. And what is more, one of the profoundest explorers of the human condition.
My face in her breasts and my hand on her. We lay there without moving, but under us all moved, and moved us gently up and down and from side to side. Past midnight, never knew such silence. The earth might be uninhabited.
I'm constantly amazed by the man's sound, by the command of language, by the purity, by the simplicity, by the use of sound and silence, the comprehension of silence.
Good, in the end, then appears.
Are you free?
Yes.
Take him away and give him the works until he confesses.
What must he confess?
That he said what?
Is that all?
And where?
Is that all?
Yes.
Then stop.
Yes.
Good.
Yes, and another thing that struck me, you fade them out, but suddenly, at one point, suddenly they're there. Is that deliberate? For example, in the end, Dim appears, and Dim's suddenly there. He doesn't fade up, he's suddenly there.
His increased work for television is in fact an attempt to get to a kind of poetry that doesn't need words anymore. He said, you see, I think most writers waste people's time by writing at too great a length. And I'm trying to reduce everything to the minimum length. And he said, well, at the end of the day, my last work will be a blank piece of paper.
Samuel Beckett was born near the village of Foxrock, just outside Dublin, Ireland, in 1906.
You first saw the light in the room you most likely were conceived in. The big bow window looking west to the mountain. Mainly west. For being bow, it also looked a little south and a little north, necessarily. A little south to Moor Mountain, and a little north to Foothill and Plain.
I've always known Sam. Our families have always known each other. And we came from the same class, the same background, you know, and the same sort of social structure in Dublin. May Beckett was a really extraordinarily interesting woman in many ways. She was a very strong woman. She ruled the house. I think the boys were rather in awe of her. She was a recluse, and she was a very moody woman, very moody, but a very highly principled woman, very, very deeply Protestant. He had an extraordinary, I can't describe to you a thing about his mother. It was not an infatuation. I don't know, it was as if the umbilical cord had never been cut. And, you know, he came back and nursed her when she was dying.
Back on the year that is gone, with what I hope is perhaps a glint of the old eye to come, there is, of course, the house on the canal where Mother lay a-dying in the late autumn after her long vacuity, and the bench by the weir from where I could see her window. There I sat in the biting wind, wishing she were gone. I was there when the blind went down, one of those dirty brown roller affairs, throwing a ball for a little white dog as chance would have it. I happened to look up, and there it was, all over and done with at last. I sat on for a few moments with the ball in my hand and the dog yelping and pawing at me. Moments, her moments, my moments, the dog's moments. In the end, I held it out to him, and he took it in his mouth, gently, gently. A small, old, black, hard, solid rubber ball. I shall feel it in my hand until my dying day. I might have kept it, but I gave it to the dog.
I think it was an American critic who once asked Beckett, is your work religious in any way? And Beckett said, yeah, it's like religion, he says, in that it deals with distress, human distress. And then Beckett went on to say, I was at a party in London, he said, and an English intellectual, so-called, asked me if my work was a work of total despair, and if I had had an unhappy childhood in Dublin. And I told him no, I'd had a very happy Protestant childhood in Foxrock. And then he said the intellectual thought me more perverse than ever.
Ah, my father and mother. To think they are probably in paradise. They were so good. Let me go to hell, that's all I ask. And go on cursing them there. And they look down and hear me. That might take some of the shine off their bliss. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah!
I think it's fair to say that Beckett is deeply influenced by his origins. he's a middle-class Dublin Protestant. Now, in the Irish context, that's a very special thing. First of all, it means that he's a member of a 5% minority. And this consciousness, because Beckett is a superbly conscious man, obviously, never leaves him.
Like Yeats, he was part of the Irish Protestant tradition, very much a minority, apt to pride itself on being better educated than the Catholic majority, and apt to possess the money and the political power, and to possess certain virtues that go with respectability. His father maintained the family in considerable affluence by Irish standards, in a big house with push buttons and bells to summon servants who ran around. And this was all done out of an office where the business was quantity surveying.
Father is still striding along in his old clothes with his dog. At night, when I can't sleep, I do the old walks again and stand beside him once again one Xmas morning in the fields near Glencullen, listening to the chapel bells.
Oh yes, he enjoyed those walks very much. There was that bond. And his father desperately tried to understand him. He tried. And it was not in his nature. It was, well, it was just maladjustment between them all.
In 1923, at the age of 17, Beckett entered Trinity College, Dublin, where he was awarded a scholarship in modern languages. After graduating first in his class, he went to Paris, where he taught English. 2 years later, he returned to Dublin.
It wasn't until Sam was going through his awfully unhappy period at Trinity that I really got to know him. The 30s, the early 30s, when he was a graduate student and had some kind of job at Trinity, but he loathed it. He was terribly unhappy. That was the time he just took to his bed.
I went out so little. Now and then I would go to the window, part the curtains and look out. But then I hastened back to the depths of the room where the bed was. I felt ill at ease with all this air about me, lost before the confusion of innumerable prospects.
May didn't know what the hell was going on in his mind. Nothing. She knew nothing of that world. She was concerned about him. She was so concerned she'd call Mother every day about him, about how frightened she was about his condition and his behavior.
No, one must never forget that Beckett was Irish. The French claim him now as French, and they're right to do so, for the country of his adoption. But he left Ireland, obviously, because Ireland didn't treat him very well. And his family just thought he was sort of crazy eccentric and didn't understand what he was trying to do, and he could never really be comfortable or be at home.
It was a narrow society. It was a very narrow literary society, dominated by the Yeats, Lady Gregory, a few people. And he wasn't interested in playboys of the Western worlds and things like that. And there must have been some inner compulsions going on to express himself in his own way, but he hadn't yet put it on paper.
But like Joyce, Beckett took Ireland in his pocket. He took Dublin away with him in his pocket, and he never really abandoned it. And while the French experience is of primary importance, it is filtered through the memories of his childhood, of his family, of his city, and of his society.